Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. We are live today with office hours from LinkedIn, and I am here with Masma Zahid. My name is Stacey Gordon, and for those of you that have watched some of the LinkedIn Live sessions that I have done in the past, you know that I'm a diversity, equity, inclusion strategist, consultant, executive advisor, keynote speaker, all the things. Today, we are talking with Masma, who has a new course that talks about inclusive tech and bias in tech. And so we're going to have a ton of questions for her. Masma is actually a Microsoft engineering manager, principal engineering manager, and she's been at Microsoft for almost 4 years. So excited to hear a lot of what she has to tell us today. And in fact, she's also president of Pakistani Women in Computing, which I think is really awesome. And she's been working with Anita B. org. So those of you in the tech industry know all about these different things. And we're going to kind of dive in with Masma today and talk a little bit about why bias matters in tech and how we can break the bias that we see. Masma, any additional introductions that you'd like to make?
Thank you so much. No, this is all good. Very, very excited to talk to all of you about inclusive tech and how do you build inclusive technology and reduce bias when you're building technology today. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, I think I've had a number of conversations with people over the years about women in technology. And, we always get into this place where we do have to kind of break it out and see that there are not as many women in technology as we would like. And I'd love to know kind of what have you done to excel, to really push yourself forward as a woman in the tech industry?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think as a woman in technology, there's the different lens to actually look at it. I don't actually just look at gender. There is the whole intersectionality of being a woman. I'm a first generation immigrant to the US. I come from a different religion. I come from a different background. So there is this combination of everything that is unique about a person, right? So the first and foremost thing is to be at peace at that, know who you are, and bring your whole self to work when you go into workforce, right? Then being authentic is one thing, and then being accepted as an authentic is a different thing. So there is this whole process of understanding, like, how do you fit in into the culture that the team has, the organization has, and what the organization can actually do to make you feel included in all of the conversations and all of the things that you do. So to me, it's as I said, it's about intersectionality. It's about understanding who you are, understanding your own bias, what you bring to the table, and then the whole environment around you, building the right culture and making sure you're part of that movement is really important.
Definitely, definitely. I mean, there's such a conversation that has been happening for a long time, right, about imposter syndrome. And there is a backlash finally, right? It's like, we hate this word. We hate this idea that people are walking around feeling like imposters. But I think sometimes you get made to feel that way when you're the only, right? You're the only woman. You're the only Black person. You're the only, person in your family that has graduated college. There's just all these things that, the world is sort of set up to make us believe that we don't belong, right? That we're this weird, strange, creature, right? That's different. And so I think what is really great about the more we're seeing that women are stepping in is that the more we do it, the more we're able to role model it for others and show them that it's not different. It's not strange, that this is normal. And so I wonder, like, in your careers, you've moved forward because you've made it into Microsoft. You've been there for 4 years now. You've had a career in engineering. What would you say is maybe a major setback that you've encountered in your career, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question. So as I mentioned, I'm a first generation immigrant to the US here. I've actually lived in 5 different countries and 3 different continents and actually worked in those places as well. So to me, I think one of the, not so much as a setback, but one of the things as an adjustment was the cultural shock, right? It's very different how I basically worked back in Pakistan versus how I worked in Europe versus when I moved here in the US. It's very different. Most of the time initially, and still I think that's the case, people are like, if you're in a team, and they make a joke about something, I don't understand a single word what they just said because I have no context of that history or anything like that. So that's a simple example. But there are cases where you feel like, as you mentioned, you don't belong. You don't feel like you have the right support to actually fit in even, right? Sometimes it's the courage that is needed by yourself to actually do that first step, be the person to speak up, be the person to actually speak for your own self as well, right? So that's the first thing. But then you also need the right environment around you, that the right culture in the team and the people around you. So in terms of my learnings, my setbacks is definitely culture shocks, cultural differences was a big thing for me to understand what's appropriate, what's the right working style, for example, how do you actually make the right culture. Now as a leader, how do I make and engrave that in the teams that I lead? That's important for me. Then the second thing was also to understand the different, as I mentioned, like intersectionalities, different people, different backgrounds. How do I include them in the conversation? So I have had, once I had an interview with somebody and I was interviewing actually at some place, and the person looked at my resume and he started talking about, oh, the number of years of experience is that I have had in this tech industry is maybe your age. And then the interview went down the hill after that point. So there was, by default, there was an age bias that a person had about looking at my resume and looking at the job that I was applying, which was a senior role, thinking that I maybe are not qualified for that. So there are things like that you see throughout the career. I can talk about hours about situations. I am still sometimes the only woman in the room, and sometimes I'm the only, when I go to customers, I am the only person in like 50, 60 people room who looks different, who's not like them. So you have to kind of overcome some of your own challenges. You have to speak up. You have to learn how to fit in, and also to create the right culture once you're a leader as well. So these are all the different things that I've experienced throughout my career. And I think every one of us has gone through some flavor of that.
Right, right. And I think we're at a stage too where it's no longer just on the part of the person who's different to fit in, right? It's on the part of the homogenous, larger dominant culture to recognize that they are that dominant culture and create a culture that is inclusive, right? To reach out and stop expecting that the different people are going to assimilate, right? And fit in every time. And I think that's what we're seeing, that right now there is a lot of focus on this, especially, one of the reasons we're doing this today, we're doing these office hours, is our courses are talking about bias. The one that I have is the unconscious bias course, which is, extremely pleased to be able to say that it's the #1 course for 2021. And we have seen that people are paying attention to this. They're starting to ask. They're starting to realize that there are things that they can do, and it's not all on the woman in the room to fit in, or the Black person in the room, or the person who is in a wheelchair, right? Like, we have to really start paying attention to others around us and being inclusive rather than exclusive. And so your course talks a little bit about, the bias that we see in tech. And I wonder, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. And your course was definitely a great one. And it talks about a lot of great types of unconscious bias. How do you actually detect that? So it was really a great inspiration. In terms of tech specifically, right? I think I look at it as the four different steps to it. It starts with people. They are the most important thing, right? and they are the most important thing in this entire equation. So if you don't hire them and retain the right diverse folks, different types of opinions, then you're not going to build inclusive technology. Just period. That's the most important thing. So I talk about recruitment, the processes in recruitment in the course, and also I talk about like what are the current general practices in the tech industry. Personally, going through that over 14 years of tech experience, that where it actually creeps in while you're interviewing folks, when you have interviewee panels, they're not diverse, of course, there's this going to happen. Then I talk about the processes, like when you're building a product, like as a product manager or an engineer in the team, what are the processes you actually think about? Everybody has some kind of sprint model or something that you Scrum or something that you follow in your teams. You collect data, you do surveys, you actually do beta releases, all of that. Like what is the process around that? How do you make sure that that bias from the development team is not creeping in while you're building that? So again, that's the second thing. Then I talk about the tech itself, like the product itself that you're building. For example, if you go in today on some makeup website and look at the swatches that they have, you'll hardly find very few of them which has like all of the different skin tones. Or at least an option to select that, right? So these are some small things that you can quickly add. And today the tech is so advanced that that can be easily added to your website. This is just a simple example, but this is very, very complex in situations where those algorithms or the tech that you're building is affecting somebody's life, right? So that's the third piece, the technology itself. And then the overall, like the culture around it, right? So you talked about like, it's not on us to actually make sure that we are the ones who actually always try to fit in. It's about the allies, the sponsors, everybody else around us who has to create an environment where we feel that we are heard, that we have the right support system around us, right? So I think the whole thing, there are different, as I said, like different aspects of it, and each aspect has a different type of bias. It starts with the cognitive bias, and we talk about data bias, and then algorithmic bias, and then what is the systematic way, how over time, if you don't keep a check on them, they creep in and they are part of the everyday systems that we use, depending on like what social media feeds we see, who is stopped by the police in the worst case scenario, for example. So all of that, right? So it's really, really important to actually consider this in every step of that and all the different aspects to actually bring this bias, reduce it. We can never remove it because we live in a biased world and we are biased, but we can reduce it and we can take actions and steps to actually reduce it. And that's what I mostly cover in the course as well.
Wonderful. And I think, you said a couple of things, everything you said was important, right? I think the thing that really stood out is that it affects people's lives, right? We don't think about how a keystroke, what the ripple effect might be and how it can affect people's lives. And, this is almost like a follow-up to the LinkedIn Live that I did with Doug Rose. For those of you watching, if you remember, I did a LinkedIn Live with instructor Doug Rose, and we talked about bias in algorithms, in artificial intelligence, and how, in the data analytics, right? How important that is, machine learning, that when it's programmed by people are biased. And so you end up programming in the bias into these machines. And it's so important that we pay attention to that and that we look for it, because it does affect people in some really terrible ways. And I wonder, do you have any suggestions? Like Doug and I talked about it. We were like, this is a hard one, right? Because how do you overcome this? And we talked through a couple of things, but I wonder if you have any suggestions.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very, very important question, and this is a really good time to talk about that. As we see the emerging tech everywhere, almost everything that we do today has some kind of tech. Like when you go online, buy something, you go on social media, you go even in worst case scenario in our court systems, everywhere that you go, there is some kind of tech on the back end, and there's some kind of data and algorithms that are there that make decisions on our behalf, on different systems' behalf, right? Some of them have proper checks and balances. Some of them were built with these checks and balances, but still there is not a lens overall in terms of bias when you are building throughout any of these algorithms. So I'll give a very simple example. Let's say you are a tech company or let's say a startup who's building something. There's a process that where you actually release a beta release to your beta testers. They are going to, before the public sees that, you actually release that to those beta testers, and they're going to test it out, give you some feedback, file some bugs, and you will go and fix those bugs, right? Now, what happens in this process is, like, this is what I've seen throughout my tech career, is the beta testers that are usually chosen are the folks that you already rely on. Those are the typical ones who know tech very well, who are very tech savvy. They know how to go test the tech. They're really like different. Like, there are certain types of people. They're not representative of the real world. So this is a very simple example where you can break bias by looking at your beta testers, for example, and include more diverse folks, people with different backgrounds, people with different tech savviness, people with different types of bias, for example, also, because they can bring in a different aspect to that. Thinking from different origins, different religions, there's so many different angles that you can add to that. So that could be a starting point where you actually look at your list of beta testers and start that. And why it's important is, at the end of that, whatever product is you're launching eventually, whatever it is, if it's life critical or mission critical or not, even if it's a small product like a website I mentioned about makeup, it affects people. Because if I'm a person, I'm a teenage girl who wants to go buy some makeup, again, an simple example, if I don't see myself represented in any of that, one, you will lose the sale. Second, that person will not probably come back to your website, or they will not feel included. The inverse case scenario could have depression, other things as well. So it's important to actually think about all of those life cycles, and this is one example. In terms of the data bias, I work in data and AI field, been in this for a long time. I think every step of the way where you collect data, there are several types of bias, and I talk about in much detail in the course as well. One very simple example, let's say you are building a vision detection model, something which is detecting an image and determining what's in that image. Now, when you build the machine learning model, you used a certain type of camera with a certain DPI or certain clarity. Now, when you actually move it to production, it's actually launched. The real life cameras, their capability could be very different. So this right there is a sample bias. This is a simple measurement and sample bias example where you train the model on something very different, and when it went to the real world, it's very different. So no wonder it's not going to be accurate. No wonder it's not going to be able to pick up the right skin tones. No wonder it won't be able to pick up the right lighting and camera. And we've seen several examples of things like that in the recent past. So this whole area of data and algorithmic bias is really important. I really encourage anyone who's building any algorithms using either machine learning or in general any of the products, really think about all of the steps in the process and figure out where you're collecting the data, where you're training these models, and when you are in production, the feedback loop that comes back from the audience, or when your model gets retrained, you have certain audits on that, and then I talk about that in my course as well.
Awesome, thank you. So we're talking with Mosma from Microsoft, who has a new course that just released recently on bias in tech. And I just want to say hello to Teresa and to Cherie, who have joined us, and there's a few others. I think that as we talk about something that you said about color reminded me of a story that I read. I did not know about Kodak, right? And how in the very beginning that they didn't have the right filters, I guess, for even being able to take pictures of people with darker skin tones. And they ended up, it wasn't until they developed it to be able to take pictures of different wood grains that they finally started using it on people. And I thought, wow, you wouldn't develop the technology to take pictures of people, but you did it so you could take pictures of furniture, right? And so it's just interesting to see how things evolve, and like we said, how it really affects people. So I think part of what we're talking about today is that everyone has to individually really think about what their potential impact is on others. Because a lot of it, we like to say, oh, you work at Microsoft, for example. You can say, oh, it's Microsoft, it's the company, it's their job, right? And then it makes it easier to take the onus off of us individually to think about how we individually impact people, every single person that we interact with, every, like you said, tech that we program, every website that we go to, right? Like we can impact those things. I mean, obviously, individually, we can't impact websites. Builders of them can. And even I just updated our website, and I literally had to sit down and come up with the keywords that go into the website. And as I was doing that, I thought, wow, that's so true. Every single website has keywords, right? And things will pop up based upon what somebody, one person, sat down and decided was what this website was about. And, that is what influences the Google searches and, when you search, what pops up for you, right? And so I just literally last night was thinking about just our impact on the internet.
Yeah, for sure. One of the examples that I think I have in my course also is if you go today on Google or Bing and just search for software engineers, you'll see in images like 9 or 10 out of 13 would be male. Again, this is just one small example of gender bias, for example. That's not true in terms of the actual numbers in the tech industry, if you just, let's say, consider US, right? And the reason is like the way over time, like all these tags that you put in when you create those websites or particular stereotypes that you have when you're growing up. I can talk for hours about the toy industry, for example, how we have its very early age, like all of the things glittery and things to kind of play with. Again, I have nothing against those things for girls, very early age, and all of the things to build stuff is for boys. And that's very early age where you make that distinction and you tell them this is what you're good at. So that's where I think the bias actually starts in these stereotypes. Actually, in terms of research, it shows that it starts very, very early, and about the age of 9. You already have built that. So you already have certain stereotypes. And it starts, as you mentioned, it starts with the person. So you first identify, first thing is say that, yes, I am biased. And do the test, do some digging into yourself to understand what types of bias you carry. And then once you go to workforce and build these technologies or work on these products, make sure that you question those things. Make sure you ask the right questions. Make sure you think about the frameworks that some of these companies have started to build now for their ML AI use cases, where they can actually look at some of the explainability, transparency, auditing the machine learning models, and then also looking at the effects that this would have on the world. So it's important to actually start thinking about that, asking the right questions, and do the right thing at the end of the day.
Definitely. So Sarah says that she believes that it's important for tech workers to be diverse in order to ensure the products are being built that take into account diversity. And it's so true, right? Like there's an old story that's old now, makes me feel old. But when YouTube was when they first created their app for Apple, right, for iOS, that their videos were popping in upside down and they couldn't figure out why. And then they discovered it was because left-handed people were holding the phone in their left hand, and they hadn't accounted for the fact that the video needs to rotate. Now, obviously, all our videos auto-rotate now, right? It's a thing. But when YouTube first did their app, it didn't, and because they didn't take into account the fact that people are left-handed. And so there was nobody left-handed in their group. There was nobody, as you said, in the beta test, right? There was nobody left-handed there either. So it didn't come up as an issue until after they had launched the product and gone to market. And then they spent all this time trying to figure out what they'd done wrong, not realizing that they had not taken into account, 10 to 12% of the population who happened to use their left hand.
Yeah, that's a great example. I think one of the other things I will add to that is like these days, think about accessibility. Over 2 billion people in the world are differently able. So when you are building technology, even if you put, let's say, upload an image, have an alt text, have an alternative text for the folks who don't, who basically, let's say, have not the same seeing like you. So think about those cases. Again, this is a very minor thing. It takes few seconds to actually do that, but that can impact a person who's actually using your technology, and that can impact the use case for that person, and maybe make them come back to your website and buy more business from you. So these are small things you can do, and there's a lot more. I think there's a really another interesting course on this as well on LinkedIn, so you can definitely go check that out. But definitely think about accessibility, think about all of the different examples, as you just mentioned. One example with the left-hand person, there's so many like that. Yeah.
Right. Well, and I think we're going live, like literally today. I think my new website will be up, and we did put in, a lot of the alt tags and things that are needed. And so hopefully they all work. But like I said, we're going live today, so if it doesn't quite work right, please forgive us. We're still working on fixing it. But it is really important to think about all the different ways that we can be more inclusive. It's so easy to say, oh, I can't be bothered, right? I just want to do things the way I've always done it. Well, we can't do things the way we've always done it. We are humans. We evolve. We learn. And we can be better versions of ourselves. And so we have to do that. And I think that my challenge to everyone would be, when you hear yourself saying something like that, right? Like, oh, I just, why bother? Or I can't be bothered, or I'm too tired, or maybe it's not that important, is to really ask yourself, who would you be excluding if you don't do this, right? Who are you going to be leaving out? Who are you saying really that they're not important enough to be considered, right? Because that's really what we're doing. And I know it sounds harsh, but we've sat in complacency for so long in our little space of comfort, and nobody has really pushed us and said, no, enough, this is not acceptable. And that's what's happening right now, which is why we have so much of this turmoil, and people are kind of up in arms like, wait, what's happening? Because there is this sense of, no, we can do better. You should do better. We demand that you do better. And it's going to take some time for us to all get there, I think.
Yeah, for sure. Starting, I think one of the comments also that I see coming through is like kind of the hiring processes as well. And then you just mentioned about having diverse workforce. So I actually dig deep into that a little bit in my course also, and looked into where are in the entire hiring process people start dropping, right? When I say people with different backgrounds, diverse backgrounds especially, start dropping. One of the very basic things you can do is to have more inclusive terminologies in your job descriptions. There are certain websites that can do it free for you. So you can actually put your copy-paste your job description there. They will highlight the terms which are not inclusive. And then research has shown that some of these terms like guru, rock star, things like that don't sit well with certain types of populations which are not very assertive, for example, especially women. So this is one simple thing you can do to actually start the hiring process, right, and actually get more candidates who are from diverse backgrounds. And then, of course, the whole hiring life cycle, interviewing itself, and then there are the ATS, like the automated systems which screen the resumes, and there is, again, based on algorithm that somebody developed or a set of algorithms that people have developed to make more inclusive over there, because they are trained on the data, and as I said, data is biased. Data shows that, let's say, women are not, there are very less percentage of women in senior leadership roles, for example. So when you actually go pass through a resume which does not align with that, so they will score them lower than men, for example. Again, this is one example. There's so many others examples like that you'll see in the hiring process. So that's just one aspect. You mentioned about a bunch of other things. So yeah, it starts with us. We have to understand that we are biased. Think about every kind of major decision that you do at work, be it a hiring decision, be it a product decision, be it anything like that. And think about why. Like, why are you making that decision? And take a pause, right? Take a pause and look into your own bias and reflect upon that. And then that is one simple thing we can start doing today. And then speak up when you see something.
Yeah, definitely. So let me ask you this as we close out. I think one of the things is there's a demand, right, for more diversity in tech. But we have this chicken and the egg issue, right, where it's like, well, we don't have enough diverse people who have experience. So how can we promote them? How can we hire them? How can we put them into these roles when they don't have experience? what advice do you have for people that are trying to either break into technology or who are trying to advance? What can they do to really demonstrate or gain the experience that they need?
Yeah, I think I honestly don't believe in that whenever I hear somebody saying that we don't have enough diverse folks in the pipeline, I really go back and challenge them, because there are so many great talent out there. It's just that it's as I said, it's part of the process. Starting with your job description, starting with the ATS system that's screening these resumes, you're already filtering these folks out because they don't fit in the typical definition of what you're looking for, right? So your question about the advice that I have for folks, especially from non-traditional backgrounds who don't have, like, let's say, a CS degree coming into tech, or things like that. These days, there are so many different ways you can learn, especially in the last year or so with COVID. I think this is level field for everyone. There is the access of internet. If as long as you have that, you can start by taking courses. There are so many amazing courses on LinkedIn that you can learn. There are technical courses, there are project-based courses, and then other courses as well. That could be one thing. So one aspect is learning. Then do projects, take projects on. You can do paid projects through freelancing. So there are several websites where you can create a portfolio, start taking up some projects over there. And that's where you can start earning some money as well. You don't have to be in a big tech company to start in tech. You can start with freelancing and eventually land in some of the companies that you really want to go and work for example. There are other ways. You can do competitions. You can do hackathons, and there are amazing things like that where you get to meet other folks from the tech industry, work on a project with them together, and those are all the things that, again, at the end of the day, you can showcase in your GitHub and add that link in your resume, and that will make you stand out in the list of all the other resumes that a hiring manager usually gets. So for example, when I get, let's say, 5 resumes, I look for people's GitHub, actually go there and look at their projects. That's something that's a great example for me right away to know their code quality, the way they explain the project, the examples that they have, and I really don't have to screen them and have the first interview call with them just to know about those projects, because they can all showcase that in their GitHub. So those are some ways you can definitely get started. And I would really ask you all to kind of look for mentors, right? There's so many people who started like you, people who look like you, people who have the same background. And maybe, again, LinkedIn is a great place to find those folks, connect with those folks, and set up a coffee chat with them and understand their career journey and ask for help. Ask for them to do actually a referral for you. So build that network, work on that, and actually work hard on some of these kind of projects to showcase that you can do it. And there's no end to it. If you have the right mindset, there's no end to learning. You can actually go do it today.
Right. That's great advice. And that actually reminds me that I do have a resume course on LinkedIn Learning. So there's lots of advice in there as well in the resume course that will help you getting your resume together. Because one of the things, and so I also do a career change course, because people always want to pivot, right? They want to pivot out, and especially right now, people are pivoting out of a lot of things into other things. And it's this understanding that being able to identify transferable skills. And so one, yes, as the applicant, as the candidate, you've got to make sure your resume is translating and demonstrating those transferable skills. And then on the other hand, we have to really work with hiring managers. And that's something that we do at Rework Work, is helping them to see that the requirements that they have, I'm like, are they really requirements? Do you really need that? Do you say you want 3 to 5 years of industry experience? Do they really need industry experience? Would professional experience be enough? So there's ways to start reframing. I think there's a question around, how do we get, what language can we use to get people to understand that these talks about, not wanting to lower the bar or being scared of a diversity hire, how do we talk around that? And I think some of it is that we have to really start changing the language. And you said it earlier, Basma, is the job descriptions, right? We get tied to these job descriptions. And once we've written a job description, it's like the Bible, right? It's like nothing shall change on this page. And we're recruiting to that. So I really think it is so important that before you even start looking for candidates, you've got to go all the way back to the job description, and you really have to look at it. 1, shorten it. 2, get rid of all the ridiculous requirements. You should have like 3 requirements. Like, what are your 3 must-haves? Everything else should be a couple of nice-to-haves. Done, right? Like, we've got to just start changing up the way that we are even looking for candidates, because that helps us, I think, down the road. When we identify the candidate, we're not then comparing them to this laundry list of things that we don't even need.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the interviewing panel itself, let's say if you have 4 people or 5 people interviewing you, they have a certain mindset, like they bring in from, they're looking for a certain persona, and they try to match you with that. I actually, when I sit on those panels, I really try to break that mindset and talk about the potential of the candidate, not what they've done in the past, for example, directly aligned with what you think they can do, but based on the potential, based on the interest, based on some asking questions about like scenarios where they failed and how they came out of it, scenarios where they were able to kind of work with others. So it's more of a team fit and the cultural fit for me than the skills, because at the end of the day, whatever you're doing today will be irrelevant in 2 to 3 years. As long as you have that skill set and mindset to actually learn upon them and have that growth mindset that we call in Microsoft a lot, is if you have the growth mindset, then you are the right hire. So it doesn't matter if you have a 4-year degree, or you came from bootcamp, or you came from the projects line or freelancing part. It's important that you actually have that mindset and you are able to showcase that during the interviewing process, and of course, once you join the company as well. So those are things to really, really think about. And then, as you mentioned, highlight those in your resumes, highlight those in your interviewing process, and build connections over time to actually nurture those relationships to make sure that you know what's going on in the tech, what's relevant, what's not relevant as well.
Definitely. All great points. I guess I'll just say, because I'm noticing some comments that the struggle is around hiring. And I will say that something we've noticed at Rework Work is that, we spend a lot of time with doing unconscious bias education for companies. But we have really kind of put our foot down now. We've said, listen, we have to work with the leaders, because offering unconscious bias education for the greater population without making sure that the leaders actually understand why this is important is, in the long run, detrimental to the company, because the leaders aren't doing what they need to do. And it's part of the reason I think we have this great resignation, right? Because people are opening up their eyes. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. And when you look around your company and realize that your leaders haven't actually bought in to what they're trying to get you to do, but you understand that it's necessary and important, then you're going to leave. You're like, I'm out of here, right? And so leaders really have to understand that this is their time. They have got to get on the bandwagon. They have got to get educated. They need to understand. And so we actually have a whole new course out. It's not through LinkedIn, but just a part of our work at Rework Work on the why of DEI, why this is important. And it's really for senior leaders, CEO teams, for them to get it. And so I wasn't planning to talk about that, but just seeing the comments in here, like, it really is one of those things I think that we're realizing that it needs to happen. We have to pull the trigger, and these senior leaders have got to, get with the program.
Yeah, and it's almost sad that we have to do that, right? In a sense, like, by now, and by now I mean 21st century, we should, like, there's so much research done. McKinsey has a really great research which shows that, like, your business is going to be 33% more profitable if you have diverse executive leaders, like, at the top layer. There's so many other research papers today. If you go search on that, you'll find out. It's just that you have to do that first step to actually start on your own journey of thinking about your own bias, thinking about why it is important, right? And then there shouldn't be any convincing afterwards. But I 100% agree with you that in this whole life cycle, so there is we talked about hiring a bit, right? Once you hire somebody, if you're not able to retain and eventually promote, that's where, again, a lot of people with different backgrounds actually leave workforce. There was an interesting figure about 7 to 8 years into tech industry. A lot of women leave because of family reasons, because of socioeconomic reasons, and then part of the reason is that remote piece. So they get stuck in this maybe senior band or not middle management, and that's about it. So there's that ceiling, glass ceiling, which is really, really hard. And I say to almost every one of my mentees, like, go break that ceiling. Nobody should be able to stop you. And there's like, you shouldn't wait for anyone to give you that chance, right? I talk about this in a lot of my talks and things like that, that there's leadership is not a title, it's about the action. So you have to start with your own, you have to start showcasing that in your work, and that's the starting point. And then, of course, if you don't, again, coming back to the culture, if you don't have that, then the retention and the promotion will not happen. Eventually, you will get burned out and you leave, or you'll find another workplace where you might find a better fit. So it's important that you build the right culture, and if your leaders are not on board, it's not going to go anywhere beyond your current team. So it starts from top down, and of course, every person has a role to play. Every conversations that you go into, every meeting that you go into, you have to reflect upon, were you inclusive? Were you thinking about the quietest person in the room? Were you thinking about the tech that you're building, thinking about the customers, the accessibility, all of the things that we talk about? And I know it's a lot, but you can start with taking some small steps in your current work, in current team, in your current hiring process. Just solve one problem at a time, and you'll see you'll go a long way.
Yeah, awesome. It's almost as if you read my book.
Maybe I did.
So for those of you that haven't checked out my book, it's called Unbiased, Addressing Unconscious Bias at Work. You see it there in the corner of my screen. But I really think that we talk about starting with awareness, and that is what a lot of people is at this place where we have to start being aware of what is happening, what's going on around us. And we're realizing that this is a time where we're saying, oh, it's hard, it's a lot of work. But I think there's a reason that work is called work, right? We don't call it work for nothing. It's literally the definition of work. When you show up to work, you're expected to work. There's going to be hard work. This is something we do every single day. So I think that we have to get out of this mindset of DEI is this extra hard thing that we have to do. It is part of the hard thing we're already doing, which is called work. It just means that we have to change our perspective a little bit and focus. We are in the middle of a change management process. And so that is what we have to also think about, is that this is just change management, right? We are evolving. Work doesn't look the same as it did 30 years ago, or as it did 50 years ago, as it did 80 years ago. We are in the middle of a process right now, and I think it's a process for good, right? So I think that's my little soapbox on work, and the idea that DEI, it is not so much that it's hard because it's this extra thing we have to do. It's hard because we have to change our perspective a little bit, and we're quite comfortable in our ignorance in a lot of really that's a lot of the places that we find ourselves in, like in this comfort zone, and we do have to shake ourselves out of that. So I do encourage you, if you haven't had a chance to take a look at the book, you could do that. I see we have another comment from Charlton. We are just finishing up here. We've got another couple minutes. I'm just looking to see, it's a long comment, I'm trying to read it. Variables that influence hiring practices, representation. Yes, definitely representation. We talked about that a little bit earlier, right? That we have to role model, we have to represent. And we have to represent in places that matter, right? What a lot of companies want to do is take women and put them as, the head of DEI, or they want to put them, on a little committee over in the corner. And it's like, no, we actually need to look at the places where power and authority lie, right? And make sure that women are represented in those places. Make sure that people of color are represented in those places. Make sure that LGBTQ individuals are represented in those rooms. And also for us, right, who are those individuals, we have to stop accepting just the crumbs, right, that we get, and being grateful for it and saying, no, not good enough. Let's do better.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the whole life cycle of that, it takes some time, right? It takes some time to actually build that in your company, in your organization, in your team. But if you have the right, as I said, like if you have the right support, that's why I talked earlier about the allies and sponsors. So to me, it's more important to have that sponsorship when you're not in the room, for people to actually advocate for you and say that, yeah, I've seen Mosma do this XYZ, and this is something like that something is important. So that's where the decisions are made. That bringing that chair, like, that's a very common, like, it's not about like being invited, it's about being heard in those tables, being part of those conversations. And then if you don't have a chair, just bring your own chair and then take the seat over there, right? So over time, again, it will take some time. Start with your own understanding of the workforce around you, and then go from there. So yeah.
Definitely. Well, thank you, Mosma. I think this has been a great conversation. I hope that you all enjoyed it today, and we are slowly taking all of the conversations that I have been having over the last few months, actually the last year, I think, and we are putting them into our Rework Work community so that you'll have easy access to them. So again, give us some time. We're working on getting things shifted into one place where you can find things, because I realize a lot of people are asking, you've talked to so many great people, you've had so many good conversations, where can I find them? And I'm like, they're on the internet somewhere, kind of, if you search. So we are taking them all. We're going to put them in one place. We're going to label them and make it easy for you to find the content. So you'll be seeing more of us talking about this as we move forward. But again, thank you, Mosma. I really appreciate you joining me today for today's conversation, and appreciate spending the time with me, because I'm sure you've got a lot going on over there at Microsoft.
Thank you so much for having me. It was great to talk to you today. And then I saw so many amazing comments come through. So yeah, just one pledge I have for all of you today is to say that, yes, I am biased and I'm going to do something about it. So that's all. Thank you.
Awesome. Awesome. All right, Mosma, stay on for 1 second. I'm just going to end the broadcast here.